On this week's show, we are talking pathways and spaces. One of the things that you don't pay attention to will definitely come about and bite you in the butt. Welcome to the show where we tackle the tough questions submitted by installers, technicians, project managers, estimators, ICT personnel. We are connecting at the human level so that we can connect the world. If you're watching this show on YouTube, would you mind hitting the bell button and the subscribe button to be notified when new content is being produced? If you're watching us on one of the audio platforms, listening to us on one of the audio platforms, would you mind leaving us a 5-star rating? Those two little steps helps us take on the algorithm, which helps get this information out to more people so we can educate, encourage, and enrich the lives of people in the ICT industry. Thursday nights, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. What are you doing? We do a live stream where you get to ask your favorite RCDD, that would be me, obviously, your questions on installation, design, certification, estimation, project management, even career paths. We actually just did a roundtable. We had 3 of the best cable dressers in the industry. Had a roundtable and talked about how to do that. You might have missed that. If you do miss them, they are on our website. Go to letstalkcabling.com and you'll find all of those videos posted there. And next, while the show is free and will always remain free, if you find value in this content and you would like to support our efforts, make sure you click on the little QR code right here. That way you can buy me a cup of tea. You can even schedule a 15-minute one-on-one call with me, after hours, of course, and just help support the platform. As I mentioned, we give pathways and spaces minimal thought sometimes, but yet it's going to be supporting our pathways for years, decades, sometimes multiple decades. And if you don't do it right, things can come crashing down. Performance can be impacted, and code might be violated. If I have to group all my questions into one major area, I guess the primary one I usually get hit with the most is fiber, and the one right behind that is usually pathways and space questions. So even though I am well versed on pathways and space, it never hurts to have multiple eyes on a question. So with me, I'm bringing one of my subject matter experts with me that we've known each other for a while. We've actually talked at the Bixie Show, and we've done some stuff in the past. We're bringing on from nVent, David Landphair. David, how you doing, my friend?
I am doing great, Chuck, and appreciate the opportunity.
It's glad to have you on. And I will say, you guys rocked it at Bixie, man. You guys did.
It was a lot of fun. We had a great stream of visitors come through our booth, and we got to show a lot of the new innovative products that we have. And you've shown a couple on the channel. We appreciate that. But it's good to be able to come out post-COVID, so to speak, and be able to see people again, talk with them, and help them with their pathway and installation questions.
Now, and just so you know, I didn't award you that award just because I know you and I love nVent, and I always, speaking of nVent,
I saw that.
I do have a fascination with you guys. I used to collect the little tabs off my boxes and collect all kinds of goodies from you guys when I was an installer. But that's not why I gave you guys the award. I gave you guys the award because a lot of people come with me with problems or questions that they need to kind of solve. And yours was one of them. I mean, I can't tell you how many times people talk to me about strut. And when I saw yours, and especially you can eliminate that stupid spring thing. Mm-hmm. Oh man, I was all over that. You probably could tell by my excitement when you showed it to me in the booth.
Yeah,
right? Yeah,
sure did. But that's a big focus of Caddy, is to try and help the installer do the installation more quickly with reliable product. I mean, that's what Caddy is really how it came to be back in 1955, was solving installers' issues.
So for those in the audience who may not know you, give us a 30-second. Who's David Landphair and who is Caddy or nVent?
Well, again, my name is David Landphair. I come from the Midwest, from Iowa originally. As far as the industry, let's just say I've been in industry since coax was popular. So it's been a minute, but it really has been an exciting ride to stay on the cutting edge of technology. I've worked for a cable connectivity manufacturer and have been with Caddy now for 17 years. So it's been very interesting. I've been involved with Bixby on a couple of different committees, very heavily involved, and was a recipient of the 2019 Harry J. Pfister Award at Bixby. So congratulations to you, Chuck, as well, on your very well-deserved recognition at the recent conference.
And let me ask you a question from one award winner to another award winner. Do you feel like you can easily name 6 people who are more deserving than you when you got your award?
You know, when I got up and accepted it, basically I said just that. You know, as I looked out across the people that were there in the audience that evening, there's just so many people that are as, or in my opinion, more deserving than myself. And I was very humbled to be recognized as such and receive that award. It was very much of a surprise.
Good. I'm just glad it wasn't just me, because when they said my name, I was like, I can name easily 6 people who deserve this thing more than me, easily. Mm-hmm. and if I put some time into it, I could probably come up with 20.
For me, very easily.
Yep. Yeah, I'm glad to know that I wasn't the only one who kind of thought that way. Maybe that's just kind of our nature as human beings, is just kind of sometimes we're our own worst critic, Mm-hmm. Yeah. So anyways, let's go with some of our questions, right? So pathways and spaces. We're really gonna drive more into pathways and spaces. I don't know why I said pathways and spaces in the intro, and like I said, that's one of the most critical things as an installer or a designer, that you've got to give it a lot of thought. And you can't just think about it today, what you're installing. You got to kind of think about stuff in the future, right? So since you got so much, way more experience with pathways than I do, what are some of your ideas of things you need to consider when you're designing or installing a pathway?
Well, your point is taken in that, a lot of the building owners and even engineers and designers, to that extent, they'll spend a lot of time looking at the cable connectivity and making the decisions for that, but not nearly as much time for the cabling pathway itself. A few years ago, I wrote an article for Bixby News and utilized the subject of NASCAR racing as the foundation of it, and the different types of racetracks that are out there. And so if you look at a Bristol racetrack, that would definitely be a gigabit track. But if you look at a Daytona or one of those types of tracks, those are high-speed racetracks. So those are going to be a 10 gig type racetrack, and there's different cars that go on both. And so the pathway is extremely critical. But when you look at, when to talk about the design and making recommendations on that, you need to look at accessibility, how to be able to get to the pathway today, but also down the road when changes are going to take place. And you notice I said when, not if. So it's going to happen. And so whether it's a non-continuous pathway or whether it's a continuous pathway, trying to look at where that's going to be in that hallway or within the structure itself, and where it's not going to be impacted by future installations of other equipment or HVAC or those types of things. That's really one of the more critical things that's out there. And of course, staying away from EMI generators, if you will, such as fluorescent lights, which thankfully are leaving us very quickly and going to LED and power over Ethernet light fixtures, but also in the mechanical rooms where there's lots of electric motors and other materials like that can definitely affect the performance of your cabling infrastructure.
Since you do so much volunteer with Bixby, I'm sure you're probably pretty intimate with the TDMM and the ITSM manual and all those other fine documents that we all should have copies of. Mm-hmm. One of the things it recommends in I can't remember if it's the TDMM or the ITSM. I'm going to kind of go off questions here, but it says you shouldn't really use bridle rings to support high performance data cabling. But there are bridle rings out there that have the little plastic inserts in them, where so now your cable's not laying on the bare metal. The concern is the cable's laying on that narrow piece of metal, and the cable's getting crushed. That obviously changes the relationship of the pairs inside the cables. But one of the biggest pushbacks I get when I tell people you shouldn't really use bridle rings is, well, what about the ones with the plastic inserts? Are you familiar with those? And what's your thoughts on those if for high performance data cabling?
Absolutely. And I'll give you my thoughts on that. First of all, bridle rings are a no-no for two reasons. First one, it's not a wide base of support. And that's what is in the 568, TIA 568, is that you do need a wide base of support. The second aspect that's just as important, or maybe even more important, is that you need to be able to maintain a 4 times cable OD for a minimum bend radius. And between those two aspects, it's very critical. Now, the plastic cradle that you refer to, we personally don't offer that, but I really look at that not so much for new installation as when somebody has tried to install the bridle rings, they get their hand slapped by the inspector, and then they go back and have to retrofit it by snapping in that plastic insert. Now, some people still buy it with the insert in it, but there's really no advantages to that. From a wide base of support, does it meet the needs? Probably. From a bend radius support, very questionable. And your bend radius is twofold. There's when you space the cables out up to 5 foot spacing, which is per TIA 569, maximum 5 foot spacing, you are going to have sag between the supports. It's not an if. You are going to have sag. And you want to try and keep that less than 12 inches is the industry guidance, if you will, in that regard. But any more sag on that, you're going to have a lot of pressure on the edge of the support. This is where you really got to be careful to adhere to. And that's really one of the reasons that you want to keep sag out of the cable as much as possible. And that's one of the reasons why I wouldn't recommend the plastic saddles, but that's just my opinion.
I'm glad you and I are the same thought there, because I'm the same way. And usually the pushback that I get is, well, Chuck, it's only 2 cables. Today, It's 2 cables. What if they put 12 cables down that 6 months or a year down? Then those cables on the bottom are going to get crushed, even on that little narrow thing, the little plastic insert. I'm with you 100%. Stay away from them.
And going to that, Chuck, not to interrupt, but one thought you made me think about it is cable will be added to a support if there's space available. If you only need space for a dozen cables and maybe in the future a few more, don't put a 4-inch JHook in, or don't put in something that much bigger, because people will, whether it be other vendors, if you will, other disciplines, security maybe, or whoever, they may say that see that open space and throw in their cabling into that very minimally filled JHook if necessary.
Yeah, if you actually follow the standards, it tells you that you really should leave room for growth, because it tells us we have to run 2 cables to every faceplate.
Right.
But for the pathway in space, it tells us to design the support system for 3 cables for every faceplate. So if you follow the standards, you're building in what people call future proofing. I don't necessarily like that term, but you're building in some room to grow, because the average lifespan of structural cable plants, 7, 8, 10 years, something like that. And they will always add. They will always add. And if you don't do it right the first time, things will work fine the day after thing. But if you got those 12 cables running through that little small little saddle plastic insert thing that I don't really like, it's going to affect the performance of the cable plant. And that's a hard thing to try to figure with a tester. We can talk about that when you and I, because actually recording this before Steve's show, but we can actually talk about that. How it's an issue like that sometimes is really hard to figure out where it is. Another issue that a lot of installers run into is poor documentation. Right? They're sent out to a job site, go put in the cable. Of course, the first thing you want to do is put in the pathways and everything, and everything. And they don't necessarily have good documentation. Do you think it's a good idea, especially if it's like a larger site where you might have a GC and multiple contractors? Like, do you think it's a good idea to reference prints from the other trades, like maybe the HVAC, maybe the electrician?
Absolutely. One of the main reasons is that, and this is a true story, is if you go in before HVAC goes in, so to speak, and maybe you're trying to get ahead of the game. I've had HVAC contractors, they really don't care about other trades, and they'll cut right through whatever it is to get their stuff installed. So absolutely figure out where HVAC is going. Frankly, I would probably almost always recommend installing after HVAC is installed. Electrical, you can work with. HVAC, they don't play nice. So that's what I've seen.
Yeah, I would put them right in the same category as sprinkler installers.
Oh, absolutely. I didn't think about that one.
Yeah. And the thing with the HVAC, even if you do look at the prints, you really want to pay attention to not only the pathway that the HVAC ductwork's going, but also the space above it, right? Because, like you said, if you don't pay attention to the pathway and you run your cables, because I've seen some HVAC ductwork mounted right up to the concrete slab, and I've seen others where they've had space across it, and that's where you're probably going to get cut if it's mounting to all the way up to the slab, right?
Exactly.
Oh, you mentioned earlier, and I want to make sure I clarify this. I mean, I know it is, but I want to make sure the audience hears this. You mentioned open top carriers. That's one of those non-trade names that we have to use quite often. Well, what is an open top carrier?
An open top carrier?
Yeah, open top support system. For like
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Non-continuous support.
Yes.
As what I would have referred to it as. Basically, it's as the name implies, it is not a continuous system. So something like JHooks, or you mentioned earlier, bridle rings, those will be a traditional non-continuous support. So there's space between those particular supports. A continuous support system would be like wire basket tray, ladder rack tray, other different types of trough systems, fiber optic troughs. Those would be a continuous system.
Let me ask you a question. And again, this is what happens when I get on with the show with somebody. My brain starts going. The squirrel, the squirrel starts running around in my head. Right? You mentioned it, right? The wire basket tray and the cable tray.
Mm-hmm.
Give me a reason why, or an explanation why somebody might want to choose one over the other.
That's an interesting question, Chuck. And the reason being is this: we acquired WBT, wire basket tray, 3 years ago, and so I've been asking some of those same questions now that we're experts or becoming experts in that area with this acquisition. And I really haven't gotten a great answer from anybody in particular on why one is used more than the other. Normally, you'll see the ladder rack tray used primarily in the closet. That's where you see it.
Mm-hmm.
Might be perceived as being a little bit more rigid because it's using a tubular metal tubing versus a wire basket tray. But in my opinion, it could be wire basket tray could be utilized in the distribution closets just as well as the ladder rack tray. The ladder rack tray requires having prefabricated transitions and turns and 90s and that type of thing, whereas the wire basket tray can be cut and bent or have some pre-terminated or preformed intersections as well. But in my opinion, they really could be used in either way. There's not really any advantages that I've been able to discern in talking to any of the contractors and engineers of ladder rack tray versus wire basket tray in the comm rooms.
Right. Is there a price difference? If I had a big floor and it had 6,000 feet of pathway needed to install, would one be more cost efficient than the other?
I would, and going off script here or off the cuff, I don't have that answer.
Gotcha.
My opinion would be wire basket tray would be more cost effective, but I just wrote myself a note to do an analysis of that because I'm not sure.
Gotcha. Because my concern with ladder rack and cable tray, actually, if you don't exercise due caution, if you overfill them, the cables on the bottom get crushed in each one of those stringers.
Yeah.
And that affects performance. With the basket tray, they're supported. You don't have, the 6 inches between the rungs. You get constant support all the way down. So to me, it seemed the basket tray would provide you a little bit less of a chance of having an issue if you have a really big job that's got a lot of cables on it. I would think. But and price wise, I've estimated both when I used to be an estimator for a contractor, but that was way too many years ago. I can't remember, to be honest with you. But
and that's a great question though, and I don't have an answer for that, but I would only be guessing at this point. But
gotcha.
I will get an answer.
Yeah, I don't want you. If you don't know, you don't know. And that's the beautiful thing about being in this industry. That's you just gotta make sure. If you don't know something, you tell people you don't know, and they'll respect you for that. Don't. I've learned a long time ago. Don't try to make up an answer because people will tear you up. They will tear you up. So when we're installing our pathways, whether it's the discontinuous or the continuous style, is there a certain height that we need to be above the grid?
And I've really looked at that, and there are suggestions. The main thing that the TDMM and other guidance resources, if you will, state is they don't want cabling resting on the grid itself. That's number one, period. No resting of cable, even from a sag perspective, between supports. They don't want it resting on the ceiling grid. And it's really from a safety perspective. Now, moving forward from that, I've seen spaces above the ceiling grid as thin as 2 or 3 inches,
right,
to as much as 10 feet or more in some cases, like in a warehouse scenario over an office area. So there's not really any guidance there. Some people prefer to have the cabling way up high to get it out of areas. My recommendation, unless there's something special about it, is to keep the cable 12 to 24 inches above the ceiling grid, because there you can pop a tile, you can still easily reach it, but yet it stays out of the way. It stays away from any EMI generating devices. It stays out of the way of the rest of the trades. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I normally recommend, is in that 24-inch area when you move forward on it.
You mentioned it. There are some ceilings that are just jam-packed. What if you open up the ceiling tile and literally 2 inches, 3 inches, 4 inches up is maybe a solid ceiling that used to be there before, but they just put in grid afterwards, right? And so you don't have that 12 to 24 inches. What would be your recommendation in that kind of a scenario?
Depends on how many cables that you have that you're going to be putting through there. A classic example is a new construction of a new motel. They historically have a very low profile ceiling, or you get into an existing hospital and you need, the only space available to you is really tight to the ceiling. We have products that will literally do that for either a small volume of cables or a larger volume of cables, is that we have ways to be able to keep the cabling up tight to the hard deck, if you will. And so it really depends upon the volume that you're looking at and need to convey. If it's large, we can find a very low profile solution. If it's a small quantity, same thing. We have solutions for that.
So there's a way to do it. There's no reason to just leave the cables laying on the tiles, because technically that's a code violation.
It is definitely a code a violation, and code being law, if you will. That's just in it. The code is a safety situation. So why open yourselves up to a safety issue if you don't have to? There are multiple solutions out there for small quantities, larger quantities, and multiple vendors. It's not just us, not just Caddy. So there are multiple solutions that are out there.
I'm glad you keyed on that word safety, because that's actually, if you actually reading the code book, it tells you it's for safety, and it also tells you in the code book that by following the code book, it won't be the easiest way to install it. It won't be the considered the future proofing of it. It's not going to be the most convenient. It says it right in the code book, and also the code book tells us it's for minimum quality of construction. Minimum quality. Can you exceed minimum quality? Yes, you can. And one of the biggest reasons for not laying a cable on a ceiling tile, well, the biggest reason is because of the fire department, right? Because they got to be able to get them to the ceiling to check for extension. And if a ceiling collapses and injures firefighters, there's problems there. But another reason is you got to be able to get back on that ceiling to do your work at a later date. The inspector has to be able to get up in the ceiling to inspect your work. That's why they don't want the cables just laying on the grid. I did, since you did your story, I'm going to do mine. I did a project, and you mentioned coax. I'm going to show my age here. Did a project for a building in downtown DC called the Department of Commerce. They used Wayne coax, dual RG59 coax.
Dual RG59.
Yep. Laying right on the grid. I mean, there was literally 12 inches of cable just laying on the grid. You could not open up the tiles in some spots. If there's ever an event, that's a lot of weight that's going to come down that could injure people.
It's to go along with that, Chuck. It's interesting that the bulk of the training facilities for firemen in the big cities now are training their new firemen, if you will, or fire people, how to make, the term is called swim. How do you swim out of a entanglement, if you will? And that would be cabling and that type of thing, which have come down. And so that would be a paramount reason not to be laying things on the ceiling grid. But another aspect is that I'm really surprised at, and particularly in areas of emergency egress, is that the NEC code still has not addressed doing away with plastic supports in those areas. Currently, they're fully legal, and we have both metal and plastic. But when I talk to an engineer, when I talk to a building owner, I really push them hard to write into their personal specifications to eliminate plastic supports in areas of egress. It only makes sense. And when, the case in point is an event that was in England back in 2010, where 2 firemen died as a result of getting tangled up in communication cabling that was being held up by a plastic support. It's totally needless.
Yeah, your SCBA only has a certain amount. Yeah, your SCBA only has a certain amount of air in it, and if it runs out, you pop open the mask and you start breathing the superheated toxic gases, and it kills you.
Yeah. So that's kind of one of my pet peeves, if you will, is there's a lot of manufacturers of metal supports. Use one.
Yeah, my preference is always going to be metal over plastic any day of the week, especially in the interstitial space of the ceiling. Another question I get hit with quite often is, Chuck, they sell the JHooks with the bat wings. That's so I can attach it to the ceiling grid wire. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, again, it's a safety situation. The NEC code is extremely clear on that. 300.11 is the specific code that this refers to. And I am asked about this code at least once a week. It's probably the one I'm asked the most for. So the code is very specific. You cannot use the ceiling grid wire for anything other than hanging the ceiling grid. If you're going to install anything, this is either electrical, communications, AV, what other application is out there, everything else has to have either its own drop wire or threaded rod or pencil rod type of support. You cannot utilize the ceiling grid wire at all per the NEC code.
So if you put in your own independent wire, the code book tells us both ends have to be anchored.
Correct.
So one end's going to be anchored to the ceiling, the other end's going to anchor to the grid. And it tells us that you have to identify that wire somehow.
That is correct.
So In fact, in the code book, it even says something about painting, if I remember right. And I know that you guys make products to make that attachment to the grid where you can tell the inspector, hey, look, anytime it's got one of those yellow clips, that's a wire that I put in. Another question I get asked that ties in kind of with this, because you mentioned it, the pencil rod and stuff. Is there a requirement for the pencil rod to go to both ends to be anchored?
Again, that is a good question, and I'm going to say it depends. The code itself is worded such that it stipulates wire. It does not talk about the rod, if you will, needs to be attached at both ends. It says the wire needs to be attached at both ends, and it's implied that it's at the top and then the bottom will be to the ceiling grid. I had one guy attach both ends to the ceiling. Technically,
well, technically he does have both ends attached,
but it doesn't work. But so if you go by the letter of the code, the answer is no. But I have seen an HJ still require that rod be attached to the ceiling grid.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's confused a lot of people because they're like, well, if I can't attach it to the ceiling grid wire, then why am I running a wire that I'm attaching to both ends that I can attach it? What's the difference? And the true difference is your wire is not there for load bearing purposes for the ceiling grid. Your wire there because you installed it for your system. That's the key. You got to support your own system.
Correct.
So while we're talking about those JHooks, right?
Yes, sir.
So they tell us we got a bond ladder rack, we got a bond wire basket. Do the individual JHooks have to be bonded to a ground?
Referring to the NEC this time in 250 dash or 0.92, if my memory serves me right, .A, it stipulates that continuous supports need to be bonded and grounded, not non-continuous. If you have a non-continuous, so you have a gap between one JHook or one metal support and another metal support, regardless of what it is, there's no way for a fault to get from here to here if it does happen, except through the cable itself. So, and that's insulated. So the answer is no, you do not need to have an individual JHook bonded and grounded.
God, imagine if they did put that in the code book. That'd be a lot of work.
That would be a lot of work.
A lot of work.
Absolutely.
A lot of bonding connectors and a lot of number 6.
A lot.
Actually, technically bigger than that because we're going past the 100 feet. So it'd be even a different size conductor. So
correct.
Even better. Yeah. So we're talking about the JHooks. I know there's nothing in the code book that talks about spacing of JHooks because I've read the code book and I've read versions of the code book. The 569, what are the general requirements that the 569 tells us about JHooks?
In earlier versions of the TI 569, it would stipulate 4 to 5 feet. The current iteration says a maximum of 5 feet. And so that's, where you're at is, and that's the current 569 is what it stipulates as a maximum 5 feet spacing.
I'm glad you pointed that out because I've been teaching for, 12 years for the company I work for now. And I've been installing in this industry for 4 decades. And it's ingrained in me 4 to 5 feet apart, random distances. So the first time I saw that, no more than 5 feet, I almost was like, huh? And I actually had to go look it up. And sure enough, it's in there. It says no more than 5 feet. Now you can bring the JHooks closer together, right?
Sure.
There's nothing stopping you from doing that, but they don't want you to exceed the 5 feet. Is there any scenarios? What scenario would drive an installer or an estimator to maybe put in more JHooks than the maximum of 5 feet?
Well, 2 or 3 ways. Some of the manufacturers out there have products that do not have an appropriate bend radius, in our opinion. And as such, if you get the spacing out to the maximum of 5 feet, it may not provide the necessary support that it needs to. If you move the JHooks closer, the non-continuous supports closer, then that's less pressure that's going to be on the edges that's there. And that's really important now when you're talking about 10 gig and above speeds, and when you're talking about power over Ethernet, particularly in the higher wattages, you've got to worry about that bottom row of cables getting pinched and a bundle of cables can definitely do that. So that would be one reason why you would want to bring your non-continuous supports in closer, is to minimize that impact. And some of the cable manufacturers actually will write that into their guidances, their cabling practices, to do that, probably for that reason.
My day job does that.
There you go.
I set that I set that softball pitch up for you so you get a home run.
There we go.
10,000 points for Mr. David. Yes. Yes. Any tips that you have that you can think of that might make an installer's job a little bit easier?
I have thought about that. I've been asked that question before by contractors and that type of thing. And really the first thing that comes to mind is education. I started in this industry back in the, early 80s, let's say. And it's been a continual learning process since then, from cable connectivity, having to learn about category cabling, and you get into the various speeds that are there, twist patterns and what have you, and fiber optics, and now wireless and high def TV and cameras and all that. You've got to be ready to learn and set yourself apart throughout the process. The other thing is don't cut corners on your materials and your installation practices. The people that do that, particularly on the installation practices, once you start down that path, then it can lead you into areas it's only going to cost you down the road. Maybe that cable doesn't, pass link test or the throughput test, and you got to go back and rerun that whole line of cable or a number of cables that are there. Anytime you have to do rework because it doesn't pass a certification or testing,
right,
that's going to not cost you only pulling the cable back in, but pulling cable out and back in, which is normally tougher. So do things right the first time,
right,
and use quality materials. Don't cut corners on not utilizing quality materials as well.
Right. And I like that. And you mentioned education. Does Caddy offer any, or have plans to offer any, free education for people out in the field?
We have a number of videos that are available on our channel that go to how to install the various products that we have, and talks to that. I personally have about an hour long presentation that we can do for a CEC credit, and we have one other one for our wire basket tray line. So we do have CEC credits that are available, but we regularly, for any contractor or end user that would like us to come in and talk to them about the various products. And I'm not there for a sales pitch. I'm there really to help educate, figure out how best to utilize the products to do the installation, save them time on the installation. Majority of the times, before, at some point in the conversation, I'll always ask them what their professional problems are, and not personal, but go into the professional problems, installation issues that they have. And I'll leave it open for them to call me after the fact, that if they have a box or some device that they're trying to attach into a scenario that they've not seen before, give me a call, and we'll come up with a solution for you, or I'll tell you who has a solution for that.
I'm kind of glad that you touched on that, because a lot of my audience members are people they've been a technician in the field for a number of years, and they're branching out on their own, and they got their own small little company. They may not have had the luck that I did of having somebody take you under their estimating wing and teach you how to estimate and stuff, right? So if someone has his own small little company and they have a job that they need to kind of figure out, I don't know how to, a bill of materials or how much footage, is that a service that Caddy offers where they say, here's the prints, can you help us design a support system?
We don't currently do that. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but we definitely can provide some guidance. Look at the drawings. This is what we would recommend that you do. This is, the products that you need to be able to do this installation, and move forward, because often we can't get on the job site and actually see what the scenarios are going to be. So, but we do offer a lot of assistance there, guidance as much as possible, just not formalized drawings and formalized bill of materials on the Caddy. We do that on the WBT. We'll provide a rough set of a bill of materials, but not a drawing to go with the WBT on the wire basket tray.
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily talking about something formal. I was just, because most times it's going to be a small little job or something. And
we
they
definitely can help on that.
Yeah, because they may not be definitely familiar with a particular line that you may carry or something. They may not know all the, and that's what used to get me all the time as an estimator was all the. I can easily figure out how many sections of cable tray I needed, but it was all the little pieces parts.
Yeah, we help with that. So that's absolutely, we'll give guidance on that. And, we always add in a safety factor for the quantity to help on that, because you don't want to get to that last 2 or 3 sections of tray and come up short. So, yeah, we always take care of you on that.
Yeah, Dad always used to say, it's better to be 20 feet too long than 1 inch too short.
That is a fact.
All the time. Hey, I got another question for you. I kind of halfway alluded to this. When I was installing the field, we used to get our Caddy boxes all the time. They used to have the little tear-off tabs. You guys still do that where you can send those in for stuff?
Absolutely. It's called the Caddy Stuff program, and it's great quality stuff. I mean, it's not cheesy stuff. It's Carhartt jackets and bibs and, Caddy stools and stuff like that. So it is extremely good quality materials. We absolutely still do that. We're working on streamlining it right now. Currently, you're supposed to send in the tabs like what you used to, but we're in the process of streamlining that here in the near future to where you won't have to do that anymore. So stay tuned for more on that one.
Yeah, that's cool. Because I hate to admit this out loud, but I used to like to go through our warehouse and find all the stuff on the shelves and take the little tabs off all the stuff on the shelves.
I've never heard that done before.
Oh, no, good. Yeah, I love that program.
It's alive and well.
Anything new and exciting coming down the path for Caddy?
Well, there's always lots of new products coming down the turnpike. We've got some on the data side that we're working on, and on the electrical side of Caddy, we're always coming out with new things. But absolutely, we have things in the hopper. We have things that we've recently released, and even innovation in regards to the JHook. We've come out with some new improved aspects to it, where the single SKU part number will be able to be attached to the ceiling or to a threaded rod by simply and easily bending the neck that's here. And This is already pre-designed. So just little things like that we continue to do to try and make it better for the installer, more cost effective, and trying to keep them competitive on their projects.
What would be the load rating on that thing you just showed me?
Great question. The JHook itself is UL listed to 60 pounds. So that means we have tested it to 180 pounds in that situation.
So it's a 3 times safety factor.
3 times safety factor. So, when you look at the UL 2239, that's what UL listing that we utilize for cable supports. And so that's really important to know that it's probably over engineered, if you will, for 60 pounds. But when you think about the 4-inch version of this JHook, it's going to be it can hold a lot of weight and a lot of big bundle of cable in theory. So we have to go to those types of scenarios to be able to hold and support the cabling effectively. The worst thing that can happen is a JHook fail, straightens out because you've got too much in it. And I've seen JHooks of other people that when they've pulled cable through the JHook, they literally have straightened out.
Oh, wow.
And that will not happen with these.
Does the angled ends that you have, does that kind of help give it some support for the weight?
Absolutely. So when we redesigned this, and keep in mind, this was the original design. This is what we call our cable cat. This is what we came out with in 1995. And I find it interesting the number of companies that even today are still copying this design versus trying to copy something like this. This has a much wider base of support. So that's number one. Number two, the edges, and this is really where it gets important for the little bit larger diameter cable, the PoE performance, the more throughput of your cable. That's where you need to have a better radius edge on the JHook or on the non-continuous support itself. And so that has really become very important to the performance of the cabling for now, but more importantly, in the future.
Maybe you can help me with this. I mean, I know the way I used to do it, but it may not be right, may be wrong. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm gonna find out here in a minute. If I'm trying to figure out if my bundle size is gonna be too much weight for JHook, how would I calculate that?
Repeat that, please.
So I got a bundle of cables, right? Let's say
Right.
it's Cat 6A cables, and let's say, I don't know, they're 40 pounds per 1,000 feet, right? And I'm putting in my JHooks 5-foot centers, right? How do I calculate how much weight a particular JHook's going to have, so I know if I need to go to shorter distances or maybe a different type of support system?
What you need to look at is you need to find out the weight of the cable itself, so you can see what it is per 1,000 feet. You'll need to determine how many cables that you're looking at proposing to put into that. But each of the manufacturers also will publish how many cables can be put into that JHook, depending upon the diameter. And so if you look at that and you take 5 feet of cable times, whatever the weight is for that 5 feet of cable times the number of cables that you're using, that's going to be the weight on that single point of support that you're going to be talking about. So when you look at, surprisingly, a worst case scenario is going to be 5E cabling versus a 6 or 6A, because the 6 and 6A actually have more polymer materials that are lighter than the copper. So the 5E actually is a worst case situation. And in a 4-inch JHook, you can easily put in between 35 and 40 pounds of cable if that JHook is fully loaded. That would not be unusual.
So yeah, so the way you described it was exactly what I did. So I would take, I'd find out what is the weight of 1,000 feet of that particular type of cable, divide that number by 1,000 to come up with a weight per foot, and then I multiplied by 5, because a lot of people don't think about this. If my JHook's here, I'm supporting 2.5 feet on this side and 2.5 feet on the other side. That's where the 5 feet came from.
Correct.
Right. And then I multiply that by the number of cables. And then I would always build in, 30% growth for weight and stuff like that too. So it sounds like I was doing it right. Yay for Chuck.
You were. And that's the other thing, Chuck, and that a lot of people don't realize, and you really alluded to it. You can't do it just for today. You've got to look at worst case scenario. Think about even JHook trees, for instance. When you're thinking about JHook trees, you're not, and you're utilizing, let's say, a beam clamp to hold and support that JHook tree. You've got to select a beam clamp that can provide the weight support, worst case scenario, for all the JHooks that you have on that tree added together.
Right.
And so a lot of times I've seen not heavy duty enough beam clamps used at an installation because they're not looking at worst case scenario.
You keep having me come up with questions. Okay. Beam clamps versus hammer-on flange clamps, or the hammer-on flange type, right?
Sure.
So which is going to be better for a big bundle of cables, right? Because it's going to be able to handle more weight.
Okay. Surprisingly, both will work fine in general. Okay. Let's say you're hanging one JHook, and let's say it's a 4-inch JHook. Either one will actually work okay. The nice thing about the beam clamps typically is that they will go on to a wider set of thicknesses of beams than a hammer-on flange clip, which is more specific. I mean, you've got the one that'll go up to 1/4 inch, the one up to 1/2 inch, one up to 3/4 inch, and so on and so forth. So you've got to really size the hammer-on flange clips to the thickness of the flange that you're going on to. The beam clamps are a lot more forgiving But to that point, a lot of people, there's different types of beam clamps out there as well. There's spring steel beam clamps. There are stamped steel beam clamps, and there are what we would call malleable iron or cast beam clamps. The cast being the strongest, the stamped being the next strongest, and the BCs, while strong, don't have a lot of lateral strength. They have vertical strength, but if you're pulling a big bunch of cables laterally, if you will, the spring steel beam clamps, they're not designed for that kind of a load, if you will, or that transition. They're designed for a vertical load. And so my preference really is the stamped or the malleable. Really, the stamped beam clamp is the one I prefer.
You're a wealth of knowledge, Mr. David. I appreciate you coming on today.
I appreciate the opportunity, Chuck. Really like the channel and what you're doing to educate the community.
Well, we covered a lot more information than I thought we were going to cover. I originally figured 30 minutes, but we had a lot more. David's a wealth of information. If you have any additional questions on pathways and stuff that we discussed, make sure you reach out to either me or him, and we'll make sure we answer your questions. Because remember, till next time, knowledge is power.
That's it for this episode of today's podcast. We hope you were able to learn something. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future content. Also, leave a rating so we can help even more people learn about telecommunications. Until next time, be safe.